We often walk through the world believing we see others clearly. We judge their choices, condemn their failures, and label their actions as good or evil. But beneath the surface of every person lies an invisible architecture, a complex scaffolding of attitudes built by the soil they grew up in, the ghosts of their ancestors, and the private storms they weathered alone. No two people see the same horizon. A man may spend his life building a fortress, sincerely believing he is protecting his legacy, while those inside the walls feel only the cold of the stone. When a life led by such rigid righteousness results in tragedy, we are left with a haunting question. Can you truly forgive someone who caused a catastrophe but lacks the capacity to feel guilt? Is forgiveness for the person who broke the world, or for the person left picking up the pieces? The Sterling Ranch was more than a home, it was a monument to gravity and power. For 3 generations, the Sterlings had been the iron pulse of the state. Mayors, senators, and industrial titans walked the oak-lined halls, their boots clicking against floors that were polished to a mirror's shine. At the head of this empire was Arthur Sterling. He was a man of business acumen, a polite term for a hunter who never missed. He found his wife, Mary, in a local Philharmonic hall. She was barely 20, a fragile girl with a voice that sounded like moonlight on water. She was a rising star, a singer who could hold a room breathless. But Arthur didn't want to hear her song. He wanted to own the instrument. With the relentless pressure of his wealth and his name, he swept her into a marriage that quickly turned into a gilded cage. Once the ring was on her finger, the music stopped. Arthur was a despot who viewed a wife as a functional asset, a tool to maintain the ranch's order, a vessel for heirs, and a silent shadow at his dinner table. "What will people say?" he would bark if she even looked toward the gates. "You are a Sterling now. Your place is in the home, not on a stage like a common entertainer." When their son Julian was born, complications nearly took Mary's life. The doctors delivered a verdict that felt like a death sentence to Arthur. There would be no more children. Arthur's dream of a vast dynasty was shattered, but his rigid principles forbade divorce. He kept Mary as one might keep a broken clock, still beautiful but no longer serving its primary purpose. Julian's childhood was not a childhood, it was a military drill. Until the age of 5, he found sanctuary in his mother's arms, listening to her hum the forbidden melodies of her youth. But then Arthur stepped in. "You'll turn him into a girl?" he sneered. The boy was subjected to a schedule of chores and expectations that would break a grown man. Julian ran away 3 times. Each time the ranch hands dragged him back. And each time, Arthur didn't just punish the boy. He made Julian watch as he berated and struck his mother for failing to instill discipline. Julian stopped running. He learned to become a stone. He spent his adolescence in a state of watchful waiting, counting every sunrise until he turned 18, the day he would go to college and leave the tyrant's den forever. College was like the first breath of oxygen after a lifetime underwater. This Sterling discipline had made Julian an exceptional student, but now that energy was fueled by a desperate hunger for life. He studied with a ferocity that earned him honors, but he also discovered laughter, late-night debates, and the warmth of a woman's hand that didn't tremble with fear. When Julian graduated, Arthur called him. He didn't ask, he commanded. "Your office is ready. The company needs its heir." But for the first time Julian didn't flinch. "I'm not coming back, Father. Not now. Not ever." Julian moved to the city, started a career in a different field, and built a family of his own. He found a wife who laughed loudly and a job where his value wasn't measured in dominance. But back at the ranch, the atmosphere turned poisonous. Arthur, unable to control his son, redirected his fury toward the only target left, Mary. She had become a pale shadow, a ghost wandering the corridors of the Sterling monument. Her singing voice was long gone, replaced by a hollow silence. Julian visited once, begging her to leave to come live with him in the city. "I can't, Julian," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the floor. "He is the heir in this house. I wouldn't know how to breathe without the weight of him." Then came the Tuesday evening that changed everything. Arthur had returned from a failed board meeting, his ego bruised. He spent 3 hours dissecting Mary's failures, his voice a rhythmic lash. Mary didn't argue. She waited until he went to his study, then she quietly took the keys to the SUV. The car was found 2 miles from the ranch. It had flown off a steep, treacherous turn on a hill where the guardrails were thin. The vehicle had rolled and burst into flames. The police report called it a loss of control due to high speeds. Julian stood at the edge of that hill, looking at the scorched grass. He knew his mother. She was a careful driver. She was a woman who was afraid of speed. He realized then that this wasn't an accident. It was her final, silent song, the only way she could truly go somewhere alone. At the funeral, Arthur stood tall, his face a mask of dignified grief, playing the part of the tragic widower for the senators and tycoons. Julian walked up to him in front of everyone. "You killed her," Julian said, his voice a low, cold vibration. "It was a tragic accident, son," Arthur replied, his eyes unblinking. "You don't have a son," Julian said. "Never contact me again. If you do, I will tell the world exactly what kind of order you kept on this ranch." 20 years passed. Julian's life was full. He had a successful career and 2 children who grew up in a house filled with music and respect. The name Sterling became a distant footnote, a shadow in the back of his mind. Then a letter arrived from Arthur's longtime assistant. The patriarch was in a hospital. The Iron Man was rusting out. Cancer had done what no rival businessman could. It had brought Arthur Sterling to his knees. He had days left and he wanted to see his son. Julian hesitated for 48 hours. He looked at his children and realized they had a grandfather they had never met. He decided to go not for the man but for the closure of the story. The hospital rooms smelled of antiseptic and fading life. Arthur looked small, a terrifying sight for a son who remembered him as a giant. The ranch hands and the tycoons were gone. It was just an old man and a machine that beeped. Arthur's eyes brightened when he saw the grandchildren. For an hour, he was a different person, telling them stories of the ranch's early days, omitting the darkness. When the children left the room, Julian sat by the bed. The silence was heavy. "I was a bad father," Arthur said suddenly. His voice was raspy, stripped of its former thunder. "I was a bad husband. I did things my way because I thought it was the only way to survive. I'm sorry, Julian. For everything." Julian looked at the man. Was it sincere? Or was it just the final business move of a man trying to bargain with death? Julian saw the father he hated, but he also saw a man who had been a prisoner of his own rigid attitudes, a man who had never learned how to love because he was too busy learning how to rule. Julian stayed for 3 days. On the final afternoon, Arthur's mind began to slip. He reached out, his hand trembling, searching for something in the air. "Mary?" he whispered, his eyes clouded. "Is that you? Did I do it right?" Julian looked at his father's withered face. He thought of his mother's unsung songs. He thought of the fire on the hill. And then he thought of his own children, and the cycle of hatred he didn't want them to inherit. "I forgive you, Father," Julian said. For the first time in his life, Julian saw a tear roll down Arthur Sterling's cheek. The man's grip relaxed. The tension that had held his body together for 80 years simply evaporated. An hour later, Arthur Sterling died peacefully in his sleep. Julian walked out into the cool evening air. He didn't feel a great weight lift, but he felt a shift in the wind. Forgiveness hadn't changed who Arthur was, and it hadn't brought his mother back. But as Julian got into his car and turned on the radio, a song began to play. He realized that by forgiving the tyrant, he had finally stopped being his prisoner.